As Christians, we don't obey the law in order to be accepted by God. We obey the law because we've been accepted by God. So it says, but when Christ appeared as a high priest of the good things that have come, then through the greater and more perfect tent, tabernacle in some translations, not made with hands, that is, not of his creation, he entered once for all into the holy places, not by means of the blood of goats and calves, but by the means of his own blood, thus securing an eternal redemption. For if the blood of goats and bulls and the sprinkling of defiled persons with the ashes of a heifer sanctify for the purification of the flesh, how much more will the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself without blemish to God? Why? To purify our conscience from dead works, to serve the living God. So what the scripture is saying, that Jesus in his sacrifice, by giving his life on the cross, made this ultimate sacrifice once and for all, meaning there's no need for subsequent sacrifices, for extra sacrifices, no need for us to do extra things to be saved. He's done it for us already, and he's done it once and for all, which means that one sacrifice is forever. So in that one sacrifice, he bought forgiveness for us and saved us from the wrath of God forever. There's nothing we need to do extra to be saved, but we are saved and justified by that one act of obedience and one act of perfect loving and perfect that perfect sacrifice of Christ. Let's go to Galatians 2 verse 21 and then also 5 verse 2, just to almost establish this point a bit more. So Galatians 2 we can start with verse 20. It says, I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. And the life I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. Verse 21, very important. I do not nullify the grace of God. For if righteousness were through the law, then Christ died for no purpose. I'll read it again. If righteousness were through the law, meaning by keeping certain rituals, doing certain things with the hopes of being saved or the hopes of being forgiven, then Christ died for no purpose. And let's read Galatians 5 verses 2 to 4. Look, I, Paul, say to you that if you accept circumcision, which is a stipulation in the law or part of the law, Christ will be of no advantage to you. I testify again to every man who accepts circumcision that he is obligated to keep the whole law. You are severed from Christ. You who would be justified by the law, you have fallen away from grace. Now, so what he's saying, that doing circumcision with the hopes of declaring yourself righteous in front of God is wrong. And if you want to go that route to righteousness, you have to keep the whole law. Now, in our culture, we don't practice circumcision in that way. But there's other things that we do that is a part of the law that I don't think we realize, like tithing. We tithe, and it's a stipulation in the law. Now, personally, when I read the Bible, especially the New Testament, I don't think the tithe, as it is explained and as it is practiced in the Old Testament, applies to the New Testament believers, because Jesus fulfilled it. Tithing was compulsory giving, and Jesus gave himself freely for us so that we could give ourselves freely to him. Therefore, as believers, we don't give certain portions of ourselves. We give our whole self, because God in his Son gave his whole self to us. So when we tithe as a means to justify ourselves before God, we are making ourselves guilty of not keeping the other parts of the law. So if you want to tithe to declare yourself righteous, you have to keep the whole law. And this is what we do as Christians, or as professing Christians. Many times we are selective in which things we want to obey and which things we don't want to obey. So what the scripture is telling us now, look, if you are going to use certain stipulations in the law to try and justify yourself, then you have to keep the whole law. And by trying to keep the whole law, you are saying that Jesus' sacrifice on the cross was purposeless. Because if any one of us could keep the law, then why was it necessary for Jesus to die on our behalf? It was necessary for him to die because none of us can keep the law. The law is perfect, but we are not. And therefore, where the law failed was in our inability to keep the law. But Jesus, being God, was able to keep the law perfectly, and therefore, when we come to God, we come on the basis of who Jesus is as our mediator, and therefore we have access to God.
All I wanna